distinguished guests, friends, brothers and sisters in the law, it's wonderful to be here. And it's especially wonderful that we're celebrating the life and the legacy of my good friend Asma Jahangir. Asma would regularly come to Britain, and she and I would meet. And we would chew the fat and talk about the importance of the rule of law in our world and the importance of the pursuit of peace and justice everywhere. And we knew together as we conspired that fundamental to that was law. That law, good law, was vitally important. I wrote a book, which I have updated at different times since, but I wrote it 30 years ago about the position of women in the legal system in Britain, but it really could have been read in most parts of the world, because it was about the ways in which the exclusion of women from the creation of law, because law essentially was made by the men in our societies because of the nature of women's position historically. Because of that, the nature of law was that it very often failed to deliver justice for women. And I called the book Eve Was Framed. And this tickled Asma Jahangir greatly. She loved the idea that it was, of course, women who were at the beginning of all this business of blaming. That it was a woman who persuaded Adam to be disobedient and to disobey the Almighty. And that was why my book was called Eve Was Framed. It was about the way in which we have to change law, black letter law, but also the way in which law is delivered, and we have to introduce into legal systems a recognition of the failure to have enough women involved, a recognition of the different lives that women have, the reality of women's lives, and that we needed to do this to deliver justice. And it's why having women in the law, having women on the bench at the most senior levels all through the system, and in our education systems teaching law, commenting on law, and women in our media to comment on law's failures and the way in which law can be improved, telling the stories of injustice. It's so important that our world is equal and fair. I regularly speak to young audiences, and it reminds me regularly, as indeed it does to me now as a grandmother, when you speak to young children about how visceral the idea of fairness is, how we all learn at a very early stage when something is unfair. And so from the earliest of times in our human development, we know what injustice looks like. From the earliest times in our human history, societies and communities have created laws to try to harmonize our societies. And of course, those rules are translated into the legal systems which are now operating around the world. The rule of law, as you know, is a foundational pillar of a stable and just society. The rule of law internationally is fundamental to peace and justice in a conflicted world. And so we must always recognize that we as lawyers and judges are operating at the most fundamental levels within our society, and we therefore have to see our role as being something in which we take pride, but something which we deliver without fear or favor. In Britain, of course, we always like to imagine that we invented the rule of law. I think that we perhaps aggrandize our role in that. But it is true that in the 13th century, Magna Carta, the Great Charter, was created, and its purpose was to rein in the power of the king. It was to say that even the king was not above law. And the message that that gave to, certainly to the England of the 13th century, was that there was no impunity even for the king. That has translated now worldwide into the idea that no one with power is above the law, and nor should they be. And we as lawyers have to remember that, and remember that that is why law is so important, and why the rule of law is there to bind us all into something greater and higher than us all. The fundamental notion of the rule of law is very often misconceived, even by those who govern us. The rule of law is not rule by law. I go to places like China. I go to places in the world where we are really seeing autocracy. And in those places, the idea of the rule of law is often on the lips of those who are in power. But they're not talking about the rule of law as we would understand it. The rule of law is not rule by law, nor is it law and order. It is something richer and deeper than that. It means that law cannot be retrospective, punishing things that were not crimes in the past, nor is it to be Kafkaesque with mysterious rules which are opaque and which are hard to fathom. The rule of law, of course, is about something richer and deeper, and it involves the independence. Fundamental to it is the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the legal profession. And that's why we operate within something honorable in which we should take pride, but that pride is only of value if we ourselves live up to its expectations. It means that we have to sometimes do that which is courageous and brave, and Asma Jahangir showed us the way. And of course, as colleagues on this platform have said, sometimes that can make you as a lawyer or as a judge unpopular with certain sections of our societies. But that is our function, and our proud function, in any society and in any democracy. There has to be media freedom in a society. Without media freedom and freedom of expression and freedom of association, without those freedoms, there is no real democracy. And the protection of the media is so fundamental to us as lawyers and judges, because if people do not know what is going on in their societies and do not receive fair and truthful information, not fake news, but truthful and fair accounts of what is happening and of the injustices in our society, then we as lawyers cannot hold to account those who are acting with impunity. Freedom of the media is fundamental to the rule of law. And so too is the activism of people in our communities who are working with those who are having their rights abused. But without independent lawyers and judges, rights are meaningless. We end up being at the front line in the protection of the human rights and the citizens' rights of all within our nations and all within our world. And it means that judges can't be corrupt. I always remember I was the chair of the British Council for 6 years, and it was at a very crucial time in the late 90s and into the beginning of the new millennium. And the president of the Supreme Court of Russia came to Britain. And I was asked to be his host and to take him to the highest court. It was then within the House of Lords, in which I sit. I was asked to introduce him to the senior judiciary and the Lord Chancellor. And he sat with me in a limousine as we went to Parliament, and he said to me, "We have introduced new law to say that the judiciary must be independent. In the old days, under state-run communism, the judges were all appointed by the state as to their loyalty to the communist regime. And we've made it clear that judges have to be independent. But the problem is that people out there just don't believe it, and they come to the back of the court and they have gifts for the judges, they bring with money for the judges, and they try to corrupt our judges. And our judges accept those gifts. What am I to do? It happens in our rural areas." And I had to say to him, the way that you deal with that as the President of the Supreme Court is that the first judge who accepts anything corrupt and behaves in a corrupt manner has to be exposed and dealt with through the courts as if he was any other criminal. And that, I'm afraid, is what happens in places where there has been a total corruption of the judiciary, where they have been brought in to the dominion of those in power and in authority. The judiciary has to be independent, but we as lawyers have a fundamental role in protecting the judiciary, in protecting that independence, and in protecting our own independence, that we are able to act for people, even people who are seen as being enemies of the state, people who are seen or accused of being involved in things which the state doesn't like, or expressing views that the state doesn't like. And that is the role of the independent lawyer. And we have to persuade our publics that as professionals this is our duty, and that we are not to be confused with the views or the ideology or the pursuits of those whom we represent. We are there as actors in the important business of delivering justice within our legal systems. And so we must avoid and fight against the attempts by government to turn judges into placemen and placewomen, people who will do the bidding of those in authority, and who will do it even not because they're necessarily told to do it, because they know there will be consequences for them if they do not cooperate with what is the dominant ideology. And so our independence is fundamental, and Asma Jahangir knew that, and she was a ferocious defender of that in our world. Professionalism means that we have to be brave, and it means that we have to stand up for human rights. In the post-Second World War period, the development of human rights has been really important in our world. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not just there, written as some document to sign up to and then ignore in our daily round. Abuses of human rights happen within the domestic domain, with the abuse of women in our households, with the abuse of children. It happens in our communities with the abuse of minorities. Human rights is the daily round of our lives, and it means that we have to examine our own way of living and the way in which we actually deal with people differently and do not respect the humanity of everyone. Populism is rising around the world, and there are increasingly attacks on judges even in places where we thought this would never happen before, where we have Trump excoriating the judiciary and in fact flaunting frequently the law. What we have in Britain just now, with the pursuit of Brexit and a removal from the European Union, tabloid newspapers carrying headlines describing our judiciary as enemies of the people. Politicians publicly denouncing and denigrating our judges, even when they do the brave and proper thing of making decisions based on, albeit our unwritten constitution, but on our constitutional principles. And when I spoke recently at the International Bar Association's conference in South Korea, and I spoke about how our Supreme Court in Britain had made a decision that was not to do with which side of the Brexit argument they were on, but which was about protecting Parliament and the role of Parliament and the role of judges in making sure that our democracy is respected. That was an act of judicial independence. And that audience of thousands of lawyers from around the world, including lawyers from Pakistan, stood up and basically clapped the idea that the independence of the judiciary is fundamental to the rule of law and something that you here in Pakistan cherish and relish as much as anywhere else in the world. And it should be a source of pride to you that you have such a courageous set of lawyers and judges. Now, we were challenged, thank you. We're challenged by the organizers of this conference to look at the roadmap there might be for human rights as we go forward. These times are challenging for us all over the world because for many reasons, there is conflict and our societies are divided. And we have to find ways of going beyond those divisions and finding the commonalities that exist between us. There should be no hierarchy of humanity. And it's why human rights are denigrated by some of our world's leaders. And we're seeing a retreat from human rights in many places. But we should recognize that the reason for that is because human rights gives voice to those in society who might not be the majority. Human rights also challenges power. And that's why it matters that we protect human rights as a fundamental and important part of a rich, full understanding of the rule of law. And so I say to all of you, it's with great pride that I'm here amongst you. I have really been uplifted by speaking with the young lawyers who I met yesterday at the preliminary conference in advance of today. And many of those young lawyers, men and women, but mainly they were young women, were talking about the role that they play as young lawyers. I say to you as the men in the room, your legal profession is being enriched by opening your arms to embrace what can be brought into the profession and into the legal system by having women as your colleagues and professional partners. And we can't change the world unless we do it together, as men and women together. We can't protect the rule of law unless we do it together. And I'm saying to all of you, many of those young women are having a hard time as young professionals. They face sexual harassment in their legal practices. And sometimes the men, even the good men, do not speak out about it. I'm relying upon you to do that. It is by supporting women coming into the profession, being their champions, speaking out and calling out bad behavior by male colleagues, that we will enrich our own profession. I want to say to all of you that you are right to feel proud of the legal profession and the judiciary here in Pakistan, but it will be undermined all the time. And so make sure that you stand together in solidarity. And I can say to you, as one of the senior persons in the International Bar Association, International Bar Association which embraces 188 bar associations around the world, we're all going to be there for you and with you when you take brave stances. We have to protect each other. Thank you for welcoming me. Thank you.